It's Shooting the Bull, a podcast by Idaho Department of Fish and Game.
We were both at Arrowrock yesterday in different boats.
Were you out there with the Casanellis?
They were in the third boat.
Oh, they were. Yeah. How'd you guys do? I heard Sarah caught a 17-inch kokanee.
I think we all did about the same.
Yeah. Okay.
It's kind of a medium day.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What's a medium day at Arrowrock?
I would say it was way better than medium. I mean, for Eric, he ended up with like 7 jumbo fish. I was with Eric.
Is that Stark? Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I had to leave early because my son was having a baseball game. So I fished until about 10:30 and then I had to bail. And we only had 2 fish in the boat. And then the next however many hours they stayed with my son, he hung out with him, they caught like 6 more. And they're up to like 19 inches. They're just massive.
There's some monsters.
Are they, crazy. Is this kind of the tail end of the peak, or you still got some time to go?
Oh, you got time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But through the end of June, by July, it tends to slow down.
Yeah.
And in August, they're kind of staging to spawn.
Okay.
But June should all be good.
But it's been a good summer so far?
Yeah, and it's really
late spring?
No, it was really hit and miss there.
Was it?
Early season. Like, people gave up on it.
Yeah.
And then the last couple of weeks have been pretty good.
And kokanee fishing is like that. It's just weird.
Yeah.
Somebody will go out and catch 2 limits one weekend, and these are big fish. So 6 fish that are 17 inches is just crazy.
Yeah.
Other people are like, oh, man, we got to go next weekend. And the same people that went will go again the next weekend, and then it's like catch 1 or 2.
Really?
So it can be like that, and especially when they're big fish, it's even more hit and miss, because when you're going to something like Anderson and it's like, man, we caught 31, and then you go back the next weekend and you only catch 12. Well, you still caught 12, and they're so much smaller that the biomass is about the same amount of catch, but you're still like, well, we still had a lot of activity. When you go and you catch 1, it's like, man, it was a slow day.
Oh, yeah. Especially talking about like getting the boat already, getting it all gassed up, getting all the kids together. It's like, golly, man.
Right, and the rod goes down twice.
Yeah.
Yeah. We got a decent perch last weekend out there too.
Really?
You're just like out in the open water. You're like, what is going on?
Yeah.
There's also times that you've probably experienced this too. Lots of pike minnow.
Yep.
We haven't seen that this year and the 2 times I've been out there, but I can remember about 10 years ago, we probably caught 30 fish and half of them were pike minnow.
Yeah.
We just could not keep the pike minnow off our rods.
Really?
Yeah, it's really weird.
Well, should we kick things off, fellas?
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. Joining us today, Joe Kozfkay, our State Fisheries Manager. Welcome, Joe. And Kevin Meyer, Principal Fisheries Research Biologist. Did I get that one right?
You got it.
Sweet. Okay. Today we got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about some catch and release science, kind of the etiquette and the I guess, ethics of what fish handling looks like. And then we're going to talk about quote unquote Hoot Owl restrictions. So we'll get to that. I mean, it's no secret, fishing in Idaho is obviously one of the biggest slices of the pie in terms of what we love to do living here. And so that's why today's kind of important, because we're going to talk about the deep dive on catch and release fishing. And for me growing up, it was always I always kind of saw it as like this ethos thing, right? Anglers either you took home what you caught or you just let them go. But come to find out, there's a lot more science to it than that. And that's kind of what your guys' jobs are, is using it as a management tool. So we'll kind of get into that. We'll get into the science, and I guess some of the misconceptions too out there floating around with fish handling and different restrictions and stuff. But yeah, welcome, fellas. How long have you guys been with the agency?
Boy, I've been a long time. 1998 is when I started.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
We started in 2001.
Where'd you guys come from?
Joe's
Joe's got an accent. I can probably pick 2 or 3 states where Joe's probably from.
Kevin and I have a remarkable number of similarities in how we got here. We're both Michigan boys.
Oh, you're from Michigan too?
I am. We both went to Michigan State. Our first primary job in the field was with the same biologist and with Wyoming Game and Fish. And then somehow we both filtered here, so it's pretty funny.
That's awesome.
And then Kevin was my boss for quite a while when I was a research biologist under him on the hatchery trout project.
Was that here in Idaho?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, he was our hatchery trout biologist for quite a while, and then moved on to regional management and into headquarters.
Very cool. Do you chase around Chucker with a bird dog as well?
I do, not nearly as successfully as Joe does, but he's kidless, and I've got 3. So they time me down to the house, and I do not get out as much as he does, and I'm probably not nearly the shot he is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that true, Joe?
I haven't seen him too much. I'm
don't
sure
want to.
Kevin does everything very well. So I'm sure he could shoot birds.
Shotgun.
Yeah.
Well, aside fishing, what do you like to do for fun, Kevin?
Well, I mean, love camping, love backpacking, fishing and hunting are just, the things that I get off on. But the kids are just kind of eating me alive in a great way. I love it. So we got a lot of baseball. My daughter was in choir and that sort of stuff. So it's just a lot of kid activities.
Yeah, a couple like Sarah and Beery and stuff down the hall. Like if they both have kids, and it always seems like there's just an endless cycle of activities for kids, sports, extracurricular stuff.
Yeah, fortunately, out of my 3 kids, the youngest really loves to fish. So
that's
as
good.
he gets older, I can keep dragging him along, and hopefully the other 2 will come around to enjoying it a little more.
Yeah. Let's talk about, on a broad scale, what catch and release is aside from an angler's perspective. Like, what is catch and release from the fish and game perspective, and how long has it been kind of in the angler's mindset?
Yeah. Joe, you want to?
Yeah, I'll start in on that one. So catch and release started in Europe in 1700s and 1800s. And it didn't migrate over to the U.S. until much later.
Was it like an aristocratic kind of thing?
It definitely was.
Okay.
Yep. And it moved over here. You heard some talk about it in the 1940s. After World War II, you have increasing human population, more recreation time, sort of advancing fisheries technology, more time for fishing.
Yeah.
And a lot of stocks were being noticed to be overharvested. And so in the 50s and 60s, they started talking about the concept of fishing for fun, which was the precursor name to catch and release.
Yeah.
Another component to that, Joe, is there was so much habitat degradation that had occurred in the early 19th century, and there was a lot of hatchery stocking that was trying to take the place of wild fisheries, and that's really expensive. And so a lot of these agencies were trying to figure out a way to save hatchery money by having less harvest, and that part of it, it's not just about wild fish, but just reducing the number of places they needed to be stocking hatchery fish by maybe some catch and release regulations.
That makes sense, because like a lot of our hatcheries too, just in Idaho, started popping up, early 1900s, 1910s maybe?
The earliest, was, early 1900s for Hasper.
Okay.
Yep.
So you're talking, it kind of correlates with then the principle of taking home fish kind of as those hatcheries started popping up.
Yeah. And then, so similar, I guess, to the rest of the country, it was starting to have those sorts of problems in Idaho, being well recognized, especially with cutthroat in the northern part of the state where they're more accessible. Even the remote areas of Idaho, which were having some new roads built, increase and improvement in rafting technology, even in our wilderness rivers, you're seeing overharvest of some cutthroat stocks, and as well as with white sturgeon. And they're starting to note population declines and population numbers declining in all of those locations and species.
How long of a window was it taking biologists to start seeing that decline? Was it decades, or was it, single digit years?
It was over at least 2 decades worth of like slow decline and notice.
But the DJ Act, the Dingell-Johnson Act that was passed in 1952, before that, the department didn't really have biologists on the ground that could be monitoring populations. So when that act passed and we had biologists now in 6 different regions. Now we have 8 regions. Back then we had 6. There were actually staff that could monitor these populations, and that was 1952, and probably hiring soon after that. So there really was no way to monitor other than anglers would maybe complain that they couldn't catch their 20 pounds plus 1 fish or whatever the regulations used to be in back in the 30s and 40s. So
Still hear those complaints.
Yeah, and the DJ Act that Kevin's referencing here is excise tax on any sort of fishing-related equipment. It's 11% excise tax. It's also on motorboat fuel. It gets collected at the manufacturer level. It's a federal tax. It goes to the federal government. Then it's redistributed back to the states, and then we can use that money to hire staff, do research, implement management programs, improve habitat, build additional access, all those sorts of things. So it's one of the most important pieces of conservation legislation that's honestly occurred in the country.
Yeah.
And it just happens to kind of coincide with the end of World War II and this concept of catch and release. And so it sort of plays a part of that story is just kind of really interesting. Kind of just a mix right there at that time, creating these kind of the need maybe for catch and release or the interest.
Yeah.
So during that period, people are noticing these declines in certain stocks of fish in certain locations, and new regulations are beginning to be enacted. And first off, they're trying to reduce bag limits, maybe associated with seasonal closures, size restrictions. And it was sort of an iterative process. They would study it, implement a regulation change. They would monitor the population and see a little bit of an improvement. Appeared to be working, so maybe they get a little bit more restrictive. More fish are being noticed, bigger sizes, happier anglers, higher catch rates. And 3 or 4 iterations in some of these systems, some of the systems it was deemed necessary to go to catch and release. And I think before we start going entirely down that road, catch and release it can be both regulatory, where a state mandates that this river during these seasons are catch and release for this species, or it's just a voluntary angler practice.
Right.
There are some people that have totally went catch and release as a personal behavior choice.
Yeah.
That's probably the vast majority of people these days. You know, back in the 50s, everybody was just harvest oriented. If you're catching a fish, you want to take it home. Now you can hardly find anybody that wants to take a fish home, at least for some species. Now, obviously,
or depending on where you go,
perch, they're out for crappie. They're obviously interested in keeping those, taking them home. But in a lot of other instances, they really just want to catch the fish and let them go.
Yeah. What are some of those
regulations are there or not?
Yeah. What are some of those species that lend themselves better to taking them home for the fryer versus catch and release?
Well, I mean, obviously warm water species like crappie and perch, probably not so much bass. I mean, bass is incredibly catch and release in this state and throughout the nation.
But it didn't always used to be, right?
It didn't. I mean, in the past, we in fact, we've even measured harvest for bass populations being in the 20%, 30%, or even higher.
Really?
But these days when we measure it, it's usually 5%, sometimes less.
Yeah.
So very rare.
Yeah.
Trout, I mean, it depends on the species. People really like to take trout. They're out camping, maybe have it at the campground, maybe take some home.
Yep.
Some species like kokanee, I mean, nobody's releasing a kokanee. They're so tasty, and everybody's just out there to harvest. So it's really very species specific.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I feel like today the bulk of what we'll be talking about with in terms of catch and release and Hoot Owl restrictions and stuff will be focused solely on trout. So I guess it's safe to we'll keep it kind of in that. But there are obviously some other species that we'll kind of dive into that are, more resistant, I guess, to catch and release. So we'll get into that in a sec. But Joe, can you guys, or both of you, can you kind of talk about, I mean, we use conservation kind of as a big catch-all, but what are some of the things that catch and release, how does it benefit some of these species that either are in decline or habitat is, I forgot the word you used earlier.
Well, there's just a lot of degradation.
Degradation.
Or alteration, if you want to use that word. Just grazing, just multiple use.
Okay.
And some of that just tends to create sedimentation in rivers or less spawning substrate that's clean enough for fish to be spawning successfully. So it's a wide umbrella.
Okay.
Yeah, so we use catch and release regulation strategies maybe 5 or 6 different ways in the state.
Cool.
So I'll start maybe with cutthroat in some of our wilderness areas, and Kevin can please help me here. These systems are very unproductive, and so fish don't grow that fast. Recruitment's a little bit limited there.
Yeah.
Mortality rates are relatively high. So when you combine all those factors, there's not a lot of harvestable surplus. And so even with light fishing effort, they can harvest all the harvestable surplus relatively easily, and then the population begins to trend downwards.
Gotcha.
We also use catch and release for species like sturgeon that they can't handle very much harvest mortality whatsoever. Like a couple percent annual harvest in a sturgeon population would decrease that population. And because Idaho's sturgeon populations are relatively small and they don't recruit very often, we have to manage them with the catch and release season.
Yeah.
And then we also use catch and release in tributary streams to large lakes or reservoirs where you may have some very large fish moving into a very small stream. That's very important, like spawning locations and spawning habitat for that particular species. And so some of the tributaries to like Lake Pend Oreille, where you have just giant fish moving into a small stream, they'd be very susceptible to overharvest. So those are managed for catch and release.
Got it.
And then we even have some catch and release for bass fisheries. In southern Idaho, at least historically, some of our bass populations didn't recruit that well or that frequently, especially for largemouth bass in southern Idaho. We would have catch and release seasons extending from January 1 to July 1. And that was just a way to keep the overall sort of fishing related mortality rates relatively low.
What were some of the factors that were, I guess, inhibiting bass from recruitment and down in those fisheries in particular?
It seemed to be very cyclical. And with bass, we're, in the northern portion of their range. And because of water temperature in the spring, they're not getting the cues to spawn extremely early in the season. And then those young of the year bass have to reach a critical size by the fall, which is around maybe 3 to 4 inch range. And so if they spawn late, they don't reach that critical size by the winter, they have a very low probability of surviving the winter.
Gotcha.
And so that's some of the reasons why we have, implemented those catch and release seasons on largemouth, because they weren't getting those conditions in every year. Now with changing climate, we're probably seeing more consistent and more common recruitment, and those sorts of regulation strategies combined with low harvest of bass may not be as necessary as they once were.
Yeah, one other example I was just thinking of while you were talking, Joe, is like bull trout, which is a threatened species. So under the Endangered Species Act, that's another species statewide catch and release because it's a listed species. So not a lot of those in the state, but that one is.
Okay.
Wild steelhead and wild chinook would be,
okay,
very similar.
Yeah.
Or they're listed entities and they're depressed populations, so it's all catch and release on those.
Now, so what does that process look like? So say you have a population and you've been monitoring it for X amount of years. You kind of know, like, okay, let's try this tool in the toolbox. what does that process look like? Is it something that you have to go and pitch to the commission? Is it something that's like, nope, next year or the next, fish management plan that's coming around, or seasons and rules regs are coming around? Like, where does that process kind of start?
Well, so I guess our regional fish managers are sort of the eyes in the field. They engage with anglers a lot. And so anglers may bring something that they're concerned about to their attention, or just from our routine monitoring data, they may see something that's of interest or concerning.
Yeah.
And so they will allocate some staff time to studying that particular fishery. And we always talk about just like a couple population aspects that they would want to consider. And so we want to know how fast or slow those fish grow, how often they produce young, how long do they live if they're not harvested. And then we like to learn about natural mortality rates, like how often fish die of natural causes, and fishing-related mortality. So the agency takes great pride in understanding those population characteristics and also how the fishery may be affecting how the population functions before we make any sort of regulation type decision.
Okay.
And so it can be 3 years, 6 years of pre-monitoring before we actually get to the regulation process.
Okay. But you said that some of the time, or even a lot of the time, you're hearing this first from anglers, their own perceptions of it out there on the water.
Yeah, quite often they'll be, I used to fish this 20, 30 years ago. I used to have much better fishing then. I don't think it's as good now. Would you guys please look into it? And if we get that from one angler, you're like, well, maybe.
Yeah.
But you start hearing it from 5, 10, 15 anglers.
Angler groups.
Yeah. And then we'll often have historical information from previous biologists that we can refer to. We'll have time series of creel survey information. We also use the tag your it. We can look at stocking records. We can look at water conditions. Like a lot of information we probably already have some access to assess that concern right off the bat. But other times we have to design new studies to try to address that question to see whether or not we need to change a regulation.
Okay.
Even the cutthroat stuff back in the 50s, a lot of that came from the anglers because they were noticing in the 50s and 60s, boy, we can't catch cutthroat like we used to catch them here in the Kelly Creek or in Selway River or, any number of other rivers where they're cutthroat fishing, or the size is just nothing like it was 10 years ago. And so, we said the DJ Act that allowed us to have biologists in different regions. A lot of times that was just biologists that were hearing from anglers on a more daily or weekly or monthly basis out fishing these rivers and noticing these declines. So a lot of that anecdotally comes from anglers as much as it does our own monitoring.
Yeah.
Some of those waters that Kevin just mentioned, the historical creel surveys showed cutthroat that were being harvested at even 6, 7, 8 inches.
Yep.
There were no few larger adult fish left, and they're basically harvesting down the size and age structure to the point there are very small fish left. And then
So let me ask you this then, because you've mentioned 3 different concerns, I guess, that anglers would have with a decline of any sort of, anything short of what the prior kind of what the high point used to be. You've mentioned size, you've mentioned catch rates, and you've mentioned surplus for harvesting, taking them home. Which one do you think, is it like a combination of all 3 that leads anglers to kind of come to us and ask for a change to a fishery, or is it simply catch rates? Because anglers, obviously, like, if I'm speaking from personal experience, I would rather catch 10 fish in a day than catch one big one and take it home. So is it a combination of those 3, or is it
Yeah, I think.
How would you rank them?
It's I think most of this is catch rates or size. Yeah, we're still catching fish, but they're nothing like the size that we used to catch.
Yeah.
And I mean, one aspect about this is populations can function at lots of different levels. You can have lots of fish that have good size. You can have a lot of fish and no size to them whatsoever. You can have populations that don't have a lot of fish but pretty good size distribution. They all can function just fine.
Yeah.
And so even in some of those early years when we were trying to figure out what to do on the St. Joe River with cutthroat, our managers would come to the public and just say, hey, this is where the fishery is. It's okay as it is, but you're not going to catch much and there's not going to be any size to it. So if that's okay, we can leave the regulations what they are. If you want something different, then we've got to start restricting harvest. And they were on board with that kind of stuff. And I think even to this day, people are the same way. We can show them, we can have a bass fishery that functions this way. If you want it to be different, then we've got to make some changes. And they usually come to us with that kind of stuff, but we can go to them that way as well, and we do all the time.
Are anglers generally pretty receptive to that, or do they try to fight, I'll say you guys, fisheries, do they try to fight fisheries on like, no, I want it to be big, I want to catch them all the time, and I want to be able to take them home? Or is that just unrealistic?
Yeah, I guess my personal experience is that most avid anglers, who are the ones that come to us most often, they are very willing or request that we reduce harvest quite often, to the point I think anglers are, they like the resource so much that they want us to protect it, sometimes almost over the top, where they would ask us to restrict it more than is absolutely necessary to make sure we're conserving the resource for the future. So there's that side of the equation too. There's also the other side. It depends on the fishery, where people are just want to maintain as much harvest opportunity as they possibly can. And we have, it's just not one, I guess.
Yeah, no, I get
expressed by anglers. It's sort of dependent on the water, dependent on the location. It could be either side of that equation.
Sure.
And then we've got to always be careful that we're not just hearing the squeaky wheel, right?
Yeah.
So you might hear a whole bunch of, well, not a whole bunch, but several people asking for certain things. And we've got to make sure that that's the majority of anglers and not just the squeaky wheels that are telling us what they think we should be doing.
Totally. Oh yeah, I wanted to ask you, Joe. Did you put the libertarian mentality thing in there?
I did.
I want to. So, what do you mean by what do you mean by libertarian mentality when it comes to population perspectives? I want to know what you mean by that.
Okay, so maybe that's not the best word choice that I just put in there. Paraphrasing, I think what is a mentality,
but I pick up on it. It makes sense
for sure. And so, like our regulation strategy, and I just sort of talked about it, is that we seek to understand the population and then only implement restrictions that are absolutely necessary to either improve the population, improve the fishing experience, or improve the economics of the fishery.
Right.
So if somebody asks for a restriction that our data and our modeling and every piece of information suggests would not help, we're resistant to that. Like, if it's not going to improve it, we try to say the less restrictions on these fisheries, the better.
Yep.
And we stick to that. And that's really we're going to talk a lot about that as we go through some of the other aspects of this talk, especially with Hoot Owl.
Yeah.
And some of the barbless hook restrictions as well.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about or have that on here.
Bait fishing.
Bait fishing.
A lot of people push us to have bait fishing regulations, restrictions. But if it's not going to change the population perceptibly, then why restrict people that like to bait fish?
Yeah. Are you talking
the way they want to fish?
I'm not familiar, but are you talking about anglers that go out and catch shiners and stuff to use as bait?
It's more
or using bait to catch fish.
It's more about like when you're going trout fishing.
Yeah.
It's well known that bait fishing causes more deep hooking There's been tons of studies that have shown that. And a lot of anglers know that. So they think, well, if you allow bait fishing, that can't be compatible with a restrictive harvest regulation, because if they're trying to catch and release, but they're bait fishing, they're killing everything that they're releasing.
Yeah.
Now, we know that's not true, but they are inadvertently killing more than if you're fly fishing. That doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be compatible with even a catch and release fishery to have bait fishing allowed. The only way we would want to restrict that is if we had information or knowledge that it is going to negatively affect the population. Otherwise, what's the point in restricting bait anglers from fishing in that water the way they want to fish it?
Right.
So that's what we're always cautious about.
That makes sense. Okay. Because, yeah, I mean, talk to pretty much any angler that's out there with treble hooks and night crawlers. They're not looking to lip them and then toss them back. It's not usually how it goes.
Right.
Right. So Kevin's like touching on the notion of individual mortality rates versus like what effect it has on the population. And his example with bait, if only 1,000 anglers or a very minimal proportion of the anglers are using bait, they don't fish very long, they're not catching many fish or hooking many fish, their impact to that particular fishery may be just non-existent or non-impactful. So we wouldn't look to regulate that. Now, if the vast majority are releasing lots of fish with very high mortality and it's a high percentage of the population, that could be very impactful. So we try to gather all that information, put it into context before we decide on any sort of additional restriction.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha. What's barotrauma? Or is that getting too far ahead? Are we good on catch and release, or do you want to keep, is there other stuff that we haven't quite hit on yet?
Well, yeah, I think we're going to sort of segue into that right here, because like catch and release is almost always associated with barbless rules. Quite often there's single pointed hook rules. Sometimes there's no bait rules. And along with just the direct harvest or the indirect or no harvest of fish, there's these other aspects like hooking and bleeding mortality. There's barotrauma.
What's that?
And so barotrauma is when you bring a fish up from deep water.
Oh.
And
they get the bends.
They get the bends.
Yeah.
And then swim bladders inflate. They can't get back down to their preferred depth, which is usually colder water.
Okay.
And sometimes they will thermal stress or be picked off by a predator.
Because, they'll just be sideways swimming up on the surface and get picked up by an osprey.
So very visual occurrence of catch and release mortality.
Yeah.
That's commonly.
And you're like, well, I did my job. I tossed it back.
Yep.
But that's not always the end of the story.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
We don't see a ton of that in the state, but something like Brownlee, when somebody's fishing at 60 or 80 feet for bass, they're going to see that. It's more of like an ocean thing. You're fishing for rockfish and you're deep and you pull it up and it's got some barotrauma.
Yeah.
Out there, you're required to carry a device to get the fish back down if you're not keeping the fish. We don't require that here, but you can have fish experiencing it in that sort of setup, like with bass at Brownlee.
Like a little detachable anchor or something, or
yeah, it's just it's basically kind of like this little thing you put in their mouth, and it's got weight, and so it automatically releases once you stop it. So you just let it down, kind of like you're letting down a big weight. It's really all it is. It's just got a hook that'll kind of hold in its perculum, drag it down to 80 feet, let it, and just stop it, let it go. The fish is back where it was when you caught it, and it's recalibrated to the depth that it was at, and it's not going to experience the same issue as if you release it at the surface.
Okay. You mentioned Brownlee, but is this something that like up north, like where we have our deeper lakes, does that also tend to be an issue, or is this like a really niche kind of problem?
Yeah, we think it's a niche problem, at least to Idaho, but this is sometime in national discussions, or even other countries discuss the like post-release things that affect the ability of those fish to survive. Some of the most common things are bleeding. If a fish is bleeding, post-release, it has a much, much higher probability of dying. And if
From like infection or something, or?
Yeah.
Just not being able to stop the bleeding before it just kind of loses too much blood. To just die. Same as you get a massive wound and you can't stop the bleeding, you can bleed out.
Yeah.
So another big component of that is deep hooking. So, we kind of already touched on this, but bait anglers tend to deep hook fish more because they're trying to swallow the worm. You can deep hook with a streamer or a dry fly.
Sure.
But the rate is much higher.
Yeah.
And there's lots of studies that have shown that deep hooking is obviously, this makes perfect sense, is more likely to do damage to a vital organ.
Yeah.
The heart, kidney, something down where the stomach is, and you're just more likely to nick something, go through the stomach wall and nick a vital organ, and then the fish is going to die from that.
Yeah.
So it can happen with any gear you're using, but it just tends to happen more with bait fishing. So you got to be a little bit careful and cognizant of that impact when you're thinking about bait fishing regulations or catch and release regulations.
Yep.
And along these lines, barbless hooks, we wanted to talk about those too, was sort of those types of regulations were implemented under the notion that they thought it would improve the angler's ability to get the fish off the hook quickly and get it re-released safely. And it would increase post-release survival, during catch and release.
Yeah.
And there's been a ton of studies done over that since that got really popular in the early 70s. And almost all of those studies indicate that barbless hooks do very little to actually improve the survival of fish. And maybe that was an overcorrection during that period of being very sort of cautious about fish mortality when stocks were depleted. And so that became a very popular regulations. It was broadly implemented, and now we're starting to wonder if that was really worth it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of anglers that were interested in barbless could tell right off the bat when you're out fishing, especially if you're trout fishing with a fly or maybe even with some sort of a lure. If you're barbless, it is definitely easier to get the hook off. I mean, we've all experienced that if you're fishing that way.
Well, it's also easier for them to pop off.
Exactly. Well, that's another thing that we were going to bring up is you can see firsthand, like, I can't get the hook out, and it takes more work. You're maybe doing a little more damage to the jaw.
Yeah.
There probably is, and there's been studies that have shown there's a little more bleeding. So people just assume, well, that must be higher mortality. But then you look across all these studies that have been done, and there just isn't any evidence that it actually leads to higher mortality.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of a feel-good thing. Like I can tell it's doing less damage to the fish, so it must be translating to an effect on that fish, and if it's affecting that fish, it's affecting the population, and it doesn't really even affect the mortality of that fish, let alone the entire population.
So let me ask you this, because I got two questions now to follow up. So because obviously there's still some fisheries that utilize the barbless hook rule, and I think of like the South Fork, so then do we implement that then where there's a fishery that is like the whole aim is to produce basically what's, a quote unquote trophy fishery, in this case for trout? Like, is that kind of, you talked about having it being kind of more of a conservative approach, maybe even overkill, but in a fishery like the South Fork or where there's barbless hooks, is that just like an extra measure then to really ensure that the population stays where fisheries wants it?
Well, with everything, this sort of depends on the intensity of the fishery and the mortality rates that are occurring to that population.
Okay, so I guess my better question is, why does the South Fork have a barbless hook?
Were you talking the South Fork snake here?
Boise.
Yeah.
South Fork, Boise.
I think we know that if that was all barbed, the population wouldn't be any different. There's been so much research done on that subject that if we change that regulation to allow barbs, the population wouldn't change at all. There's just been too much research that would show that. But there's a lot of interest from a segment of the fishing public that doesn't want to go back to barbed fishing on the South Fork of the Boise. So it's really more of a social regulation than it is a biological regulation.
Interesting.
And it just got implemented a long time ago, and there's
just never went
a lot
back.
of inertia to changing it back.
Okay.
And I guess the consequences that we see are, one, people, they're out there fishing, and I'm sure you've probably done this. I've never done this. Is pick a fly out of your box, tie it on, you fish with it for 5 or 10 minutes, and you look down, and you're like, I've been fishing with the barb.
Yep.
And you could have very easily gotten a ticket, force our officers into a very difficult engagement, which is their job, but to also write a ticket for something that's not going to improve the population. So as an agency, we struggle with that notion.
Yeah.
There's also the notion that by not allowing certain anglers to have barbs, we may be affecting their experience.
Yeah, and you just kind of touched on it, that it's hard to get it out of the fish when it has a barb, and it's easier when it's barbless. It is easier to lose them.
Right, yeah.
As mentioned.
Yeah.
There was a study
Been
done.
there.
Yeah, there was a study done in California on this issue around 2005 it was done by Roger Bloom. He was a biologist there. And he looked at the impact of barbless versus barbed fishing on catch. And he saw that for novice anglers, intermediate anglers, and advanced anglers, which are like expert anglers, and they kind of categorize themselves.
I didn't get a call.
Yeah. They categorize themselves, but it's defined by like, I'm fishing like umpteen days, like 100 days a year or 50 days a year in advance, whereas a novice is more like 5 days a year. They saw that catch rates go down for every kind of category of angler. But the interesting thing I saw with that paper is your catch went down more than double
With barbless.
No, it's compared to a novice compared to an advanced angler. So the impact of changing from barb to barbless impacted a novice angler more than twice as much as it did an advanced angler.
Yeah.
So it just shows that advanced anglers are really good at landing the fish, even if it is barbless.
Yeah.
Novice anglers have a much harder time keeping the fish on. And it's the advanced people that generally are the people pushing for barbless regulations because it doesn't impact them very much. They don't notice the drop-off in their catch rate because they don't lose as many. But we're trying to encourage, there's a lot of anglers out there, and I'm sure there'd be a lot of people that listen to this is like, the last thing we need is more anglers. But you're trying to make it accessible to people that don't really know what they're doing and make them happy and landing fish and having a good day. And if they're losing more fish, you're impacting them more than you are people that really know what they're doing. So
Gotcha.
And when it doesn't affect them biologically, that's where we have a kind of an obligation to make sure we're looking out for people that aren't advanced anglers.
Yeah. This seems like the most appropriate podcast to ask you guys this question. And if you don't know the answer, that's okay. But have there been any studies done that show or focus on like the recovery of a fish wound in its jaw from like just so for instance, if a fish, or if you take a fishery there's a lot of repeat hooking, I guess, what's the rebound time on like how that heals up?
Well, sometimes it never heals.
Okay.
I mean, if you get into some fisheries that have heavy fishing,
I'm thinking of like sturgeon
release,
where there's big hooks.
Yeah. I mean, you worked on sturgeon a lot more closely than I have.
Yeah. We did some creel surveys on sturgeon in some of our more accessible reaches in the Snake River, middle Snake River around here. Some of those fish are hooked an average of 8 times a year. And so they're caught and hooked very frequently. Surprisingly, they heal very well. I mean, there's some scarring you see, but it's not that bad. Kevin's probably more, there's some concerns in Wyoming right now with the Miracle Mile.
What's that?
It's the North Platte in central Wyoming. It's a blue ribbon trout fishery, tailwater fishery in Wyoming, where the incidence of deformed jaws and scarring, a lot of anglers are starting to complain, express concern about maybe overutilization. In Alaska on some of their very trophy rainbow trout fisheries. This is even 10, 15 years ago. There was concern about injury rates in some of these trophy fisheries.
Sure.
But you can also go to the South Fork of the Snake River, that gets fished so much. It's probably one of our heaviest, if not our heaviest fished river in the state.
Yeah.
And the average fish that you catch, you're not going to notice much, if any, hooking scars, or if they lose a mandible, it's not coming back. They don't regrow that. But most fish you would land in even a fishery like that are going to look perfectly healthy, or as healthy that you're not going to notice anything.
Yeah.
So they heal pretty well.
Is there a barbless restriction on the South Fork snake? I can't remember.
I don't remember either.
I don't either. I don't think so.
I don't think it is.
Okay. What the heck is shark predation? Why'd you put that on there? What's shark predation?
What?
Talking about anadromous fish?
Yeah, I guess in the bigger fishing...
Or salmon sharks?
Yeah, just like the range of things that are being studied in catch and release mortality is it's very broad right now. This is like a big topic in the fishing world and the science community. And so, fish experience a lot of different aspects once they're released, and we talked about bleeding. They may be more susceptible to predation. And obviously, this doesn't influence fresh waters, but some concerns with ocean fisheries is when you catch and release a fish, you've exercised it, maybe you take a picture with it, you unhook it, you release it. It could be susceptible to higher levels of predation. Okay. And that's definitely a concern in the ocean.
Yeah.
We don't think that's a concern anywhere in Idaho that I can think of, that a released fish is automatically going to be ingested by a predator.
Yeah.
Sure, you see eagles, ospreys sometimes picking off some kokanee that can't get down because of inflated air bladders, or maybe they're stressed or something. I guess my point in bringing that up was there's just a lot of angler concern with post-release effects from experiencing catch and release right now.
Okay.
Yeah, it is remarkable worldwide how much interest there is in this subject. And, not that catch and release doesn't work. It's more like it works. There's been decades of research that's shown catch and release really can work to recover and sustain even heavily fished populations. But a lot of this stuff is just but does it work in this situation? Does it work in that situation? And the one Joe's referring to is, bonefish flats where there's sharks cruising, and those kind of fish, when you hook them, they just scream out line and just really exhaust themselves, and they're more susceptible to shark predation immediately after release. Okay. So there's anglers that, will have some sort of a recovery bag. So they land the fish, put it in the bag, let it recover for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever they feel like it needs, or whatever the guide is suggesting that they do with this fish, and then release it after it's kind of recovered. So there's just so much interest in this subject across the globe. We just, we get a sliver of it here in Idaho.
Okay. So is it stemming a lot from anglers, perceiving this resource that they have historically gone after for decades, are they perceiving a decline in that, or is it the experience that is declining for them? What's kind of the nexus for, if it's a worldwide thing, why is there suddenly more awareness?
Well, to me, I wonder how much of it might just be a little bit of guilt. I'm catching and releasing, but what impact am I really having, and should I be doing it this way? Or almost finger pointing that you're catch and releasing, yes, but you're not having the positive benefit that you think you're having, and maybe we need more research to show that you're still having an impact even though you are releasing the fish alive.
Is there a lot of finger pointing that you've heard of, at least just in Idaho, between your typical stringer and cooler crowd versus catch and release crowd, or is that?
There's definitely some.
Okay.
Yeah. Different like stakeholder groups or gear type preferences. They'll definitely blame the other gear type for causing all sorts of mortality.
Yeah. And it's an interesting concept because you don't see it in the wildlife world.
It's definitely interesting. It also can be, impactful. Like if one preferred, if an angler who prefers to fish with a certain gear type, if they're successful at saying, no, you can't fish that way, those other anglers may choose to quit fishing. And I think we've seen that in some instances, like people that like to harvest trout in streams, when these regulations got very restrictive, we think we lost people that really like to harvest, and that it's very hard to get them back.
Really?
Especially in some systems where we're begging people to harvest fish.
It's hard to get the regulation back, or the anglers?
The tendency of people to harvest fish.
Oh, okay.
Well, like if it's not passed on, I guess, from maybe generation to generation, it just doesn't organically create itself that easily.
Okay.
And we have systems in the state where we would really like people to harvest trout, either because they hurt native species, or there's too many of them and they're growing slowly, and people just won't do it. And so,
or there's just a harvestable surplus that they're missing an opportunity for, that we can see and we can encourage them to take advantage of.
Yeah. You guys want to talk about the 3 species there listed, and what you mean by extremely resistant to catch and release mortality? Is that something you guys want to jump over to? Do you want to talk about kokanee a little bit in terms of the low mortality?
I talk about those.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So, we just talked about species that are not resistant necessarily, but resilient to catch and release mortality.
Okay.
So, one of the examples that we were kind of thinking of talking about is steelhead. Our wild steelhead experience a fair amount of angling pressure because anglers are out there trying to harvest the hatchery surplus. We set up these seasons for anglers to take advantage of that opportunity, knowing that we're still going to get enough hatchery fish back to produce the next generation of fish swimming out to the ocean.
Yeah.
But these wild fish are susceptible to angling at the same time. They're not targeted, but they're caught.
Yeah.
People are trying to catch hatchery fish.
And just real quick, how can you identify, for those listening, like how can you identify a wild how can you differentiate between a wild and a
so
hatchery?
All of our hatchery fish have a adipose fin clip, so they're all missing the adipose fin. And if you land a fish that has a adipose fin, you've got to release it because it's a wild fish, whether it's a Chinook salmon or a steelhead. We don't do that with our trout fisheries, obviously, but this is all fish that are being released from our hatcheries, and they're all fin clipped, the adipose fin clip, before they go to the ocean. So when they come back as an adult, they don't have an adipose fin, and it's a hatchery fish, and you can keep it. And if they do have that, it's either a misclip. Sometimes that does happen, and it really is a hatchery fish, but you don't know that. No one else would know that until you actually ran genetics on it or something.
Gotcha.
So if it's got that adipose fin, you've got to release it.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of concern about the impact that anglers are having on wild steelhead and wild Chinook. We have for a long time had assumptions on what kind of an impact anglers are actually having, how much how many of them were encountered. So is it 100% of all the wild fish that come back? Is it 20%? We had some assumptions on what that encounter rate was. When anglers are out fishing for hatchery fish, how many of the wild fish that are coming back from the ocean are actually caught while they're trying to catch and harvest a hatchery steelhead? And what is the mortality rate for those fish that are released? We've always assumed it was 5%. We suspected it was maybe less than that. Other people have argued maybe it's more than that. So, because that kind of gets at like the full impact rate for a particular year that steelhead are coming back, wild steelhead. And so we recently funded a project through University of Idaho. One of the grad students worked with us on setting up the project, used our Tag Your It system to answer this question, tagged all the hatchery and wild fish that we could get our hands on at Lower Granite Dam. And, not to get into the nitty-gritty details of the study design, but what we learned from all this was the encounter rates are pretty much the same for wild steelhead and hatchery steelhead, and it's about 50%. So about half of the wild and hatchery steelhead that get to Lower Granite Dam, then swimming into Idaho, are caught by an angler, which is a pretty high rate. Catch and release mortality was 1.6%. So that's a really low rate and lower than what we had been assuming for decades. And that the assumption is about our take. How much take can we have on this protected ESA species by allowing anglers to fish?
What was that number again?
Is 1.6% was the mortality rate. And we were assuming for a long time that it was 5%. So it was much lower.
Yeah.
And that's really good. So when you think about half the fish are encountered, and you're inadvertently causing a 1.6% mortality rate, that means the impact to that year class is less than 1%. And that's a really good number for us to see. We were very pleased with that because it just kind of shows that we're not having much of an impact on our wild steelhead. And we presume it's the same for the Chinook salmon as well.
And I guess 50% encounter rate, is that just for the wild fish? Or is that you should say that was hatchery as well?
It's the same for hatchery fish.
Okay.
But they're obviously harvesting all those, right? There's not that many hatchery steelhead during the prime season that are going to get released. They harvest them and they have to release the wild fish. So that's the ones that we're really concerned about.
Are there anglers that
release a hatchery fish? You can do that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, are there anglers that do that?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Some people just want to catch the fish, or they don't want to stop fishing, so they release, and then they keep one toward the end of the day.
Gotcha.
Fish all day.
Yep.
So steelhead's a good example where they're quite resilient to catch and release, and a lot of people did not suspect that was the case. I mean, they're very concerned about this population and the impact that anglers were having.
Especially as we allow eggs to be used as bait. People use tuna balls sometimes, treble hooks. And so there was a lot of different entities that thought that maybe the mortality rate would be quite a bit higher since we allow, those things, treble hooks and bait.
Yep.
And the other example that you talked about earlier, the creel that you were doing on sturgeon below CJ strike, I mean, we were seeing how many each fish was caught on average 7 times.
Hooked. Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable. But we're also monitoring that population in conjunction with Idaho Power, and we know that the mortality rate for the population, the total annual mortality rate for the population is, let's say 2% or 4%. I don't know what it is specifically for that reach, but in general, it's about 2 to 4%.
How are you monitoring that? Oh, sorry. Go ahead and finish your thought.
So we know, even though each fish is getting caught 7 times, and there must be some level of hooking mortality, it's obviously extremely low because the total annual mortality, natural mortality plus any hooking related mortality, only totals up to 2 or 4%.
So are we then just tagging? We'll go out there and tag a random sturgeon, and then we're documenting how many times that tagged sturgeon gets caught by anglers, or is it monitored a different way?
Well, I think you should probably speak to that.
Are you counting the holes on their jaw?
Yeah,
they got like tattoo marks.
So that would have been averaged across the whole population. So sturgeon gets a little bit complicated. We partner with Idaho Power because of their hydroelectric facilities. They're required from their FERC license to monitor many of these populations in Idaho.
Okay.
And they use set lines and then also hook and line and some drift gill nets. and they catch sturgeon. They put a pit tag in them, and they let them go, and then they resample and they scan for those pit tags. And if you do that enough times, you can estimate population abundance, and you can also estimate the mortality of these populations, mortality rate of individuals, and also across the population.
Yeah.
And so we knew what the size of that sturgeon population was at that time. And then we did a creel survey year long. It was actually 24 hours a day. We did it through the night and everything. And we would count the number of anglers, figure out their catch rate, and then you can estimate the number of sturgeon that were caught, which was way higher than the population number. You compare those two numbers and you can figure out the average catch frequency per individual.
Okay.
Yeah, so in that stretch, what is it? 300, 400, 500 sturgeon?
It was, at the time, it was 550, I think. Yeah.
Right. And then, we knew that 3,500 sturgeon had been caught in that reach, and it's like, well, there's only 500 of them there. So
Yeah. So how does that add up?
Yeah. So on average, seven times for each fish landed or hooked.
And then downstream of American Falls Dam is very similar. It's very high catch for those individuals. And I guess the point why we're bringing this up is like sturgeon, if fishing related mortality even got to like 5%, we'd be very concerned. But we've talked a lot about trout already, and it's much different with trout. They die naturally at very high rates. So,
And they're not also living to be 90 years old either.
Exactly. And so maybe they live 7 or 8 years for an old trout.
Yeah.
And so we're okay with mortality rates up 20, 30%, just in a general sense. And so we monitor these populations, and if we see fishing related mortality for a trout population get over 25, 30%, depending, there's differences among places and everything. Then we start being concerned and thinking about whether or not we need to adjust regulations.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get back to trout and kind of talk about, I guess, some of the factors then that could lead to mortality after you've hooked a fish, specifically holding a fish. And I know you guys have done studies on this where holding a fish out of water for X amount of time can lead to either mortality or, long-term side effects, whatever. Can one of you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so maybe that started with a study, I think, that was published in 1992. It was published by some physiologists in Canada who were looking at the physiological effects of exercise and air exposure on rainbow trout. And so they set up an experiment, and they found that if you held these fish in their experiment out of water for even 10 seconds, they had some level of mortality. But the experiment was not set up to see how much mortality would be caused by air exposure. It was really a very high stress for the fish study because they were looking at physiological effects. So even the fish that had no air exposure had a 10% mortality rate in their study. So they were exercising the fish to exhaustion, to the point that in the lab, it was like this, I think like a circular donut raceway that they were simulating a stream, and they chased these fish for, I think, 10 minutes, to the point that they were so exhausted they would be pinned often against the back of the screen of this raceway and wouldn't move even if they were further stimulated.
Yeah.
So that's how exhausted and stressed the fish were.
And then hoisted up.
Held out of water.
Yeah.
Holding them out of water for any amount of time was causing a fair amount of mortality. But like I said, even fish that weren't held out of water at all had a 10% mortality. So they were already on the edge of mortality to begin with. But that study really stimulated this surge in, oh my gosh, you can't hold fish out of water because it's going to cause a ton of mortality. And a whole bunch of research got done But and we can get into some of the research that we did as well. But one of the things that never got asked is how long are anglers even holding fish out of water? Because a whole bunch of studies started to be done on holding fish out for 30 seconds or 60 seconds or 2 minutes or 4 minutes and the impact that it would have on the fish and the mortality rate. And no one even knew what anglers were actually doing. So we started there and did a study here in Idaho, and we did a follow-up study as well, and showed that most anglers are holding trout out of water about 20 to 25 seconds. And that's when you're hooking it in a stream. You get it in, and it takes about 50 seconds. On average, fight time was around 50 seconds. Get it to your net or to your hand, release the fish, maybe take a picture, maybe you don't. About 20 to 25 seconds. And that's out of a fish that hasn't been put through some sort of a rigmarole like in this experiment.
Yeah.
Now, from there, what kind of an impact would 30 seconds have? We had a grad student, we funded a grad student to work on this issue, and they did a study where they caught fish at a weir, held fish out of water for no time, 30 seconds and 60 seconds. 60 seconds, you'd be really surprised at how long 60 seconds is. The studies that we've been doing on this subject, air exposure, we've been watching anglers covertly because we know if people saw us there in fish and game uniform.
Yeah, they're going to throw that thing back in 3 seconds.
Differently. So we're watching these anglers, and like I said, 20 to 25 seconds, that seems about normal. When you see someone holding a fish out of water for 55 seconds, it is flabbergasting how long that is.
Yeah.
Yet the research that we funded through this grad student showed even for 60 seconds, zero mortality. And we released these fish above this weir. We caught them at a weir and then held them out of water, released them above the weir, and then monitored out-migrating juvenile cutthroat trout that either their parents had 0 seconds of air exposure, 30 or 60. And so you would think if it was having an impact, the fish that had been held out for a minute would produce less offspring because they were diminished physiologically when they were released above the weir. It had no impact whatsoever on the outmigrants.
Okay.
So it just showed it didn't affect their survival or their ability to produce offspring. And so there are studies that have shown some level of mortality with air exposure, but it's usually 2 minutes, 4 minutes, and these are for trout.
God, what are people doing for 2 minutes?
Well, no one does that. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Like, yeah, they'll do it in an experiment to show that it's having some level of impact. And then they'll show that, and then they still kind of come back and say you shouldn't hold it out of water for more than 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And we have been resistant to that because anglers want to take a picture, right? Grandpa wants to take a picture with his granddaughter or his grandson. Dad or mom want to take this picture that they're going to hold forever. And then anglers get this notion, well, we shouldn't be doing that. It's impacting the population. It's having no impact on the population or even the fish that you are holding out of water. If you're doing it in a reasonable amount of time, 10, 20, 30 seconds, even up to a minute, which we do not recommend anyone holding fish out of water for a minute. But even when you're holding it out that long, you're not impacting their survival whatsoever. And this is for trout. Same thing for, smallmouth bass or crappie, something like that. Now, sturgeon, you can't hold that out of water at all.
Right.
Because their skeleton is cartilaginous and that'd be very injurious to them. So that's one example where you are not allowed to hold the fish out of water. But if you
are they the only one in Idaho that
I believe
is kind of under that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you want to hold a fish out of water, get a picture, you're not harming that fish long term.
So that initial paper that Kevin mentioned, it got picked up by the popular media.
You're talking about the BC one in the 90s?
Yeah, Ferguson and Tufts is the name of the authors.
So you kids listening, you guys can go read that on your downtime.
It's a dry read, but that's what Kevin and I do all the time is read these long manuscripts and see if they make sense or not. And theirs was a lab study, and I'm not poking holes at what they did because they even said this study should not apply to wild fisheries. But as soon as it got out there, it made all of the national fishing circuits, and it just spread like wildfire. And then anglers see that from maybe an author they trust or an outlet they trust.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, they're asking agency folks like, you need to make it illegal to remove a fish from water. And some states did. And,
Even trout.
Yep.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah.
So you got to de-hook it down in the water in the net.
Yeah. And some anadromous salmon as well. And we take the approach like we always do. We're like, well, we'll see if this really matters. We're going to see what anglers do in the wild. We'll see if that matters to mortality. We'll see if it matters to recruitment before we propose a regulation or not.
Gotcha.
And Kevin's shop and all of his collaborators just did a wonderful job of studying it in a practical sense, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We got pushed pretty hard on steelhead as well.
Yep.
They really wanted that no air exposure for steelhead. But, we measured steelhead anglers as well. It's like 25 seconds of air exposure.
Yeah.
So no indication that would have any effect.
Just kind of anecdotally, I want to know, but like, did you like overlay like a map of like cell phone usage and technology over this study just to see is like the more cell phones became commonplace, the longer people started holding them out of water?
Well, we have looked at the effect of if you take a picture or not.
Yeah.
And it adds about 10 seconds. But again, that 10 seconds is part of the overall average of only 20 to 25 seconds. So, yes, it does add a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's surprising how few people take a picture of each fish.
I could see that.
Not that many people take a picture of fish.
Yeah.
Maybe 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20 for trout. And so it's just not having, even for steelhead, I can't remember what the exact ratio was, but it's pretty low, 1 out of 10.
Yeah.
And it only adds 10 seconds, 15 seconds at the most.
Yeah. Is like the bulk of, I think I'm getting into the weeds here, but is like the bulk of time then just the mad frantic rush to get the hook out of the mouth is probably what takes up the majority of the time?
Yeah.
I don't know what else you'd be doing with the fish in your hand other than taking a picture and getting a hook
A lot
out.
of people are taking the hook out real close to the water anyways. They're just, maybe they're doing it by hand. I mean, I don't often bring a net with me if I'm trout fishing. I just get it in my hand. Stand up, just pull the hook out. I might have to reach for pliers if it's particularly stuck and let it go. And some people are just a lot more lollygaggers about it. But again, like even the lollygaggers, you incorporate them all in and it's still only 20 to 25 seconds. So it's a real short time.
Yeah.
And he's not just making these numbers up. Him and his staff were sitting in the bushes with binoculars and stopwatches and documenting all these catches.
And that grad student that we had also did one chapter of their thesis was on air exposure on the South Fork, and they found the exact same thing.
Did you ever get any calls on you guys being weirdos in the bushes?
I don't think anybody ever noticed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They're too busy looking for fish. Watching flies and casting.
So, for those of you listening, if you ever wanted to know what day in the life of a fish and game fisheries biologist is like.
Yeah. The truck.
Yeah.
The bushes. We even did it from the top of Dingell-Johnson Reservoir because we were watching steelhead anglers up there and still not very much air exposure.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you ever see any guys doing high fives and stuff like that? Oh,
yeah, for sure. And that's where you're like, God, I can't believe how long they're holding that fish out. 40 seconds. It's a long time. You think about it. Start a stopwatch and think of that. But
you're like, okay now, yeah.
Yeah, there's no research that would show that would have an impact.
Wow. Interesting. Hoot Owl restrictions. It's speaking of our friends up here in the Northwest and other states. Joe, I'm gonna go back to your metaphor that we're kind of the libertarian mindset of doing things, and I think that's outside of just fishing stuff. I feel like that's just kind of the Idaho way anyway. We don't tell us what to do in different regards. I'm assuming that a large majority of our listening audience have heard what a Hoot Owl restriction is, but if you haven't heard what a Hoot Owl restriction is, who wants to hit a definition on it first?
I'll go. It's a term that originated from loggers.
Okay.
And in morning shifts for loggers, they would hear hoot owls still calling in the morning.
Okay.
And so at the time, they would stop their shifts in the early afternoon because running chainsaws could increase fire risk. And so that period was known as Hoot Owl because it's cooler in the morning. When it starts getting warm, you quit your activity.
Okay.
And so...
do you happen to know which state that came out of?
I think it was in the Pacific Northwest with spotted owls in Washington and Oregon.
Okay. So not Idaho.
Maybe a bit, but no. I think
We'll have to dig on that one. All right. So then how does it apply to fish, and why is Idaho different in that way?
Okay, so this is a movement that sort of got going in Montana. And so we're talking about another aspect of, the post-release conditions that a fish experiences after a bout of catch and release and exertion from fighting and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And so the Hoot Owl, there was a study in Montana basically that showed that as the water warms, the incidence of mortality after a catch and release event increase. And so the results of this study were published, and there was a lot of interest on this study, the individual effect of that mortality.
It was on the Gallatin River, right?
It's one of them.
Rainbow trout, brown trout, and whitefish.
And the Smith River was another two.
So historically popular stretches of river that get hammered pretty hard.
And one of them, especially the Smith River, got fairly warm. And so there was also at the same time a recognition that some of Montana's streams were getting lower and warmer, and some of those populations were struggling at the same time. The results of this study were coming out. Anglers were being very concerned about these population level declines. And so there's a giant social push, along with some information that on an individual basis, mortality increases with increasing temperature.
Right.
And so the policy maybe got in front of some initial research, and they implemented a program that says, it's even in their administrative rules, that once the temperatures exceed certain thresholds, and it's like in the 65 to 73 degree range, anglers have to cease fishing after 2 p.m. And
there was another study on Atlantic salmon too, back east, that also saw a slight increase in mortality as the temperatures went up.
In the oceans or in the rivers and tributaries? Okay.
People that were fishing in the rivers as temperature was rising, post-release mortality for cotton-released Atlantic salmon was higher than at cooler temperatures.
Got it. So this issue then it's more of a social perception thing. It's not a climate change related issue that state agencies are exacting.
Well, we're I don't want to say that we're deniers. Obviously, fish mortality increases when they're exerted at higher temperatures. We totally acknowledge that. But the question is what does that mean to the population? And if you restrict it, is it going to help stabilize that population, or is it going to have no effect?
Right.
And so the way that we looked at that was looking at creel survey information. And Kevin can talk about how they studied how catch rates change during elevated water temperatures.
Yeah, so while we were, the department was getting pushed on this issue, we didn't have a lot of information. We kind of felt like it wasn't having the impact. We weren't even sure if it was going to have a mortality effect.
Real quick, when did we start kind of hearing this or getting pushed on this topic?
20.
Yeah.
Oh, so recent.
Yeah, it's been real recent.
Okay.
I don't remember the year the Montana study was
16
done.
or 17, I think. Yeah.
So our shop got asked to look into this, and so what we did was we conducted a study where we went out fly fishing. Our staff did, myself, and Joe was actually co-author on this study as well. We angled.
So not only do you look through the bushes with binoculars, but you get to fly fish a little bit too.
The study was maybe the only time I've ever had to fly fish in the study, and it was not a bad gig.
Yeah.
But yeah, we would go out in the middle of the summer when we knew on streams that we knew were going to be warm, and on days that we knew were going to be warm in the heat of the summer. We started fishing in the morning, and we fished all day. We tracked how many fish we were catching at certain temperatures. So we were monitoring our catch rates as the day went on and as the temperatures warmed. And we were tagging caught fish and releasing them. And then once that part of the study was done, we went back a few weeks later, let the fish just mix, settle. We went back and did a recapture event with electricity. Now, we were not measuring straight up survival. We were measuring relative survival. So it was survival recapture rates relative to the temperature at which that fish was caught. So if there was an impact from the water temperature at the time that fish was caught, if it negatively impacted them, then the likelihood that we would come back 2 weeks later and catch that fish electrofishing would be much lower than for fish that were caught at a cooler temperature. We would get more of those fish than at the warmer temperature because they all died and the fish that were caught at a cooler temperature didn't. So that was the study design. What we found was that mortality rate was higher at a higher temperature, so that corroborated what they saw in Montana. But we also saw that the catch rates went down pretty much commensurate with the mortality rate going up. So the warmer it got, the more likely that fish was not going to survive the landing and releasing, but also the less likely you were going to land any fish in the first place.
Right.
So the number.
Well, not necessarily land, but just hook them, right?
Yeah, you just don't hook them.
Yeah.
So we did some back of the napkin calculations and put this in the paper and showed that at cooler temperatures, the catch rates that we had in the streams that we were working in, we would have landed in an 8-hour day of fishing 42 fish. So pretty good catch rate. It's a smaller stream. The fish were pretty decent sized, up to maybe 16 inches cutthroat.
Okay. Cutthroat, or are you catching any other species?
It was
okay.
The study was just on cutthroat. We did land a few other species. We just disregarded them, or a couple other, like brook trout or something. So what we saw was, if we fished at the cooler temperature, we would have caught, on average, 42 fish in an 8-hour day. At warm, elevated temperatures, our catch rates went down to only 10 fish in an 8-hour day. So you're only catching a fifth of the fish that you are at cooler temperatures. So you can only inadvertently cause a mortality on 1/5 of the fish. Now, when you factor in the mortality rate along with that, we know that catch and release mortality is about 5% on fly fishing. There's been dozens of studies that have showed that. So we didn't know what real mortality rate is. Like I said, we were looking at relative mortality rate, but we know from tons of studies that have been done, it's probably about 5%. If you were to double that with elevated temperature, you would only have, well, I guess let's put it this way. Out of those 42 fish, at a 5% mortality rate, you're going to inadvertently cause a mortality on 2 of those fish. So you've inadvertently killed 2 fish by going out and fishing at cooler water temperatures, because that's just what happens. You don't release every fish alive. I think most anglers understand that. It's not a 0% mortality rate. So you accidentally killed 2 fish that you landed. At elevated temperatures, you only have 10 fish that you landed. Now, if the mortality rate is double what it is at cooler temperatures, you only inadvertently killed 1 fish. And if it's 4 times higher, you're only inadvertently killing 2 fish, which is the same as if you had fished the whole day at a cooler temperature.
Yeah.
So, and what we saw was about a doubling. So you're actually, if you fished a whole day at elevated water temperature, you're probably inadvertently killing half as many fish as if you fished an entire day at cooler water temperatures. Now, we're not going to turn that on top of its head and say, well, maybe we should restrict anglers fishing at cooler water temperatures because they're doubling the mortality impact.
You can only fish when the water's it's 82 degrees and above.
Right, because you're going to catch so few fish that you're not going to have any impact on the population. Now, that would be silly, but to us, it's just as silly to go the other way and restrict people fishing at elevated temperature because they're actually having probably less of an impact on the population. And they know it's not that fun to be out fishing because their catch rate is way lower.
Right.
So they are I'm just not going to fish after 2 p.m. because my catch rates go in the toilet. I'll just go back to camp and hang out and have fun and maybe fish in the evening when the temperatures come back down. So they'll kind of self-regulate themselves on that. Mm-hmm. But for us to do that as an agency when we know it's not having any impact is why we don't implement a regulation like that.
Got it. And I think that's probably the best breakdown I've ever heard of it. Cause it's one of those things where numbers are not my friend, but you talk about catching X during, cooler, normal, ideal trout fishing days versus the hotter ones. Yeah. And it's like hard to, from at least my brain, to wrap around like that lower number is, you're catching less fish is basically the bottom line.
Yeah. And I've, since we did that study, I have wondered like how sturgeon would fit into that. I don't know if we know enough about catch rates with sturgeon at elevated temperatures versus cooler, but it may sort of self-regulate itself as well. I don't know. We've never looked into that.
But as an agency, we have jumped in during like historically warmer water events in regards to sturgeon, though.
Yeah, a couple of years ago at CJ Strike, we had elevated water temperatures and very low oxygen levels, possibly associated with some fishing and catch and release on those fish, and some sturgeon mortalities occurred at around the same time in the same location. Because we have to be extremely cautious about increasing mortality rates on sturgeon, we did have to close a fishing season. Yeah. And then, of course, this year with the water conditions that are going to occur, the Snake River is going to be really low by this summer. It's going to be warm. Yep. Those conditions are going to materialize again, so we'll be watching that sturgeon population very closely. Yeah. And if we need to set the season there, restrict the season there, we'll do that.
Do we have any anecdotal evidence that sturgeon catch rates go down just like they do with cutthroat on hotter days?
We do, yeah. The creel survey that we have done, the highest catch rates for sturgeon were May and earlier in the season, and then June, July, August.
Those suckers dive down deep.
Yep. And just very lethargic.
Yeah.
The thing about sturgeon, though, is, you're out fly fishing for trout. You land the fish in, like we've shown, about 30, 40, 50 seconds. You hook a big sturgeon, and it might take you an hour to land that fish. And that is very exhaustive exercise, kind of like that Ferguson.
For who, the fish or the angler?
Both. Yeah, that's a great point. But kind of like that Ferguson and Tufts study that was done where the fish were really, really exhausted. That's when the mortality rates are really going to go up. And so that's what we're concerned about with sturgeon is it just takes a long time to land those fish. They're so big, no matter what gear you're using, it's going to take many, many, many minutes, if not a half hour or longer to land that fish. So it's going to have a much bigger potential to have an impact on that individual fish than a 14-inch trout that takes 60 seconds to land instead of 48 seconds or whatever. So it just doesn't take long with them, and it doesn't stress them out that much. Sturgeon, it can really stress them, and that's something we're concerned about.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. Kind of talk about, I guess, the difference between education rather than shaming. How does that come into play?
Well, we've talked quite a bit about these topics being popular in sort of the fishing media lately. And so people that are very avid anglers, they read about it and say, air exposure should be limited. You shouldn't fish in the afternoons. And They may take it a little bit too far when they see somebody holding a fish out of water. Maybe it's out, somebody's taking a picture, enjoying the moment, collecting the photographs that are going to be cherished memories.
Yeah.
And they think that's too long and that fish is going to die and it's going to hammer this population. And some anglers have actually gone about attempting to engage other anglers in, I would say, a non-respectful manner and actually shame them about
social media or out in public,
both.
out in the field, I guess.
We've seen it both ways. It's very common social media wise. I've purposely witnessed it on the water a couple times where I've seen other rafts yelling at anglers and other rafts, like get it in the water, keep them wet, those sorts of things. And it's just all the things that we talk about today, we don't want to come across as the agency being anti-best fish handling practices. We're certainly not. We think people should be careful with these fish, attempt to release them in as good of condition as possible. But you may come across somebody not following those best procedures. And I think as an avid angler, if you see that going on, there's a way to approach somebody and talk to them in a respectful manner rather than scolding, yelling, shaming, or attacking on social media. So, just handling it appropriately.
That's go ahead, Kevin.
Well, our regulations even have a page, best handling practices, and release the fish as quickly as possible. If you're going to take a picture, do it as quickly as possible. Again, we're not opposed to any of this, but you just have to be conscientious that what you feel is correct isn't necessarily what other people feel is correct. Like, I feel like I can hold this fish out of water and get the picture, then that's okay. And if you don't feel that way, then don't take that picture or do it underwater. That's fine.
Right. No, I appreciate you guys pointing that out because it's easy to, I think, sound kind of cold and heartless when you're only going by the science of something. And you have this contingency of people that see this issue as something that is more of like, it sounds like it's more of like a social thing. Like their groups around them also believe in this practice of not fishing when it's hot. But I think that is, even though like backing only the science can sound kind of cold and heartless, it's important to point out, like you both did, that it's a resource that our agency is very proud of and takes very seriously. And it's more of like, here's the science. You go out, the angler, go out and choose what you would like to do, not us breathe down your neck and, hammer you with regulations and restrictions.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think you'd find people in the department are on average as passionate or just as passionate, maybe more passionate than your average angler. I mean, we're all in this we love it. We want this resource here forever. We want every population to be as outstanding as it possibly can. So the last thing we're going to do professionally or just as people are jeopardize any of these fisheries. So our job is to do the best that we can and allow people to do what they want to do in their fisheries that they're most excited about. Harvest the fish that they want to harvest if the population can withstand that. Catch and release practice if that's what they want to do, or if that's what's required for that particular population. But we're all, I guess, in this together. Yeah.
No, we are the opportunity state, man, when it comes to both wildlife and fishing, and it's cool that our management practices kind of keep allowing that, at least in terms of, we're talking about today fishing. But
yeah, and I think some other states have kind of looked at our reaction to these subjects and felt kinship, or they're happy to follow maybe our lead or our example of why we're not instigating some of these regulations. Because there's a lot of other states that haven't done this sort of research that we have, but they're getting pushed by their anglers as well. They know that some states are enacting regulations like this, and if they don't have information to back up the decisions that they're making. I think they're kind of looking to us in some of these instances on just these specific topics we're talking about as justification for why they're not implementing regulations like that as well.
Yeah. Are there other states, I guess, like Montana, then that are kind of, I guess, not as thrilled with differing opinions, or not? I'm not just throwing Montana under the bus, but since we talked about them specifically, but are there other states that do have Hoot Owl restrictions and they abide by them and kind of don't see the same philosophy?
Joe, you got a feel for that? There aren't a lot of states that have that regulation. I think Montana is comfortable with the regulations they have. I think their anglers are comfortable with that regulation. I'm sure they're just like our anglers. Some of our anglers think we should implement those regulations, and a lot of them don't think it's an issue. I'm sure a lot of their anglers are the exact same way. And right now, I think their staff is comfortable with the regulations they have.
Yeah.
A lot of these things that have been implemented, or some of these things, were probably more appropriate to just be recommendations and educational sort of topics rather than regulations. And they shouldn't have been implemented as regulations because they don't affect the population at large. That's sort of where we try to draw the line on that. And I think it's a good practice for all fisheries and wildlife management.
You'll see that nationwide. You see, like, I think Pennsylvania, New York. There's a lot of states that have signs that they'll post on certain fisheries or in their regulations booklet recommending, ceasing fishing at 73 Fahrenheit or something like that. We don't have that regulation, but minimizing air exposure. So a lot of people are pushing those best practices, but they're not regulating it. There's very few that are regulating it.
Yeah.
We're in that boat.
Gotcha.
So the only thing we didn't talk about, which I'm sure you can edit and
totally
and if you want to, and I don't know that we need to go there, but we never really talked about total annual mortality rates and additive and compensatory mortality, and why a little bit of angling mortality, harvest, or even catch and release may not really make any impact on total annual mortality rates.
Yep.
Oh, that's a good point. And you're talking about the whole big picture of the ecosystem, right?
Yeah, when
just
we're thinking
all the
about
things that kill fish.
Yeah, when we're thinking about a population, we're generally thinking about growth, recruitment, and survival. And really, for survival, it's total annual survival, right? So if there's 1,000 fish in a population 1 year, how many of those 1,000 fish are going to be around next year? And that's whether there's a fishery on it or not. So whether 20% of those 1,000 fish are caught by anglers and kept, or zero, how many will that even impact how many of those 1,000 survive to the next year? And what we as fisheries biologists term that is either additive or compensatory mortality. So you can have a 50% total annual mortality rate, and that's pretty typical for trout. Most trout populations are around 50%. So you could close the fishery to angling and go back 10 years later and measure what the total annual mortality rate is for the population, and it'll be about 50%.
Really?
And you can do that by going in and sampling and aging the fish, and then it's the science to it's really not that complicated, but you can build this what we call an age length key and see how many age 2s there are, how many age 3s there are, how many age 4s there are, and it just goes down and down and down, and the rate that it goes down is the total annual mortality rate. And so, like I said, it's generally about 50%
For stream trout.
For stream trout, right. It can be a lot higher than that.
And just to clarify, we're not talking stockers or anything like that.
Just wild trout population.
Okay.
So for brook trout, out of all trout, they're notorious for being really fast growing, really high mortality rate. And we've measured mortality rate in a brook trout population of about 90%. So that's 90% of the fish are not around the following year in a stream where harvest was pretty much non-existent. It's a small stream.
Yeah.
Not small enough that you can't fish it, but small enough that nobody really does fish it. Or if they do, it's the harvest rate is inconsequential.
So then how are their populations growing then in that
Yeah, so I mean, they're almost all age 1s and age 2s or age 0s, a lot of fry. And all age 1s and age 2s, they can mature by the age of age 1. So if they make it from fry to age 1, they're spawning the next year. And so all they have to do is survive from age 0 to age 1, and they're reproducing and creating a whole bunch of age 0s the following year. They make it to age 2, they've got even more eggs or even more likelihood as a male to pass on their genes. And by the time they get to age 3, there aren't any. So in a population like that, you could literally, and we did this for this population, this was a particular population where there was historically bull trout, and there was like a remnant population left, just a few. And this was
A remnant few of brook trout.
bull trout.
Oh.
It was all brook trout and red band trout, native red band, native bull trout, brook trout not native. And this was during Governor Batt's years, and there was these watershed advisory groups that were trying to protect bull trout. They had just been listed. And one of the ideas on this particular stream was, let's get rid of the brook trout and bring back the bull trout. Well, they didn't want to poison it with use a pesticide like rotenone, because it's going to kill the few remaining bull trout left, plus the native red band. So let's try to just electrofish and get them out. And that's really hard to do. It's because it's just really hard to get all the fish. You never get them all. But we got involved in this project to monitor it. And what we saw was we could harvest about 80 to 90% with electricity. So we're pulling out 80 and even 90% of the fish, trying to suppress the population and get rid of them. And then the next year, the brook trout population was exactly what it was the year before.
God, they're like coyotes, man.
Another year of 80 to 90% suppression, and you come back the next year and the population is exactly what it was the year before. So that's with electricity. You could do the exact same thing with fishing. We could have had anglers, and it was open to fishing. So if they wanted to fish it, they could. But it's the same thing. You could have that much angling harvest on that brook trout population, and the following year, the abundance would be the same as if you had zero angler harvest, because that's the total annual mortality rate. And any fish you don't harvest with electricity, in our case, but if you could even use the example of angling, any fish not harvested has the entire stream to itself. So it has all the groceries in the world, all the habitat in the world. Almost every single fish that doesn't get harvested by electricity or by an angler is going to survive. So the total annual mortality rate for the population doesn't change, but the harvest changes dramatically from 0 all the way up to 90%. So that's a case where the mortality is just compensatory, what we call compensatory. It didn't change total annual mortality. Additive is when you increase the total mortality rate, the total annual mortality rate, as you continue to harvest more and more fish. And there's been lots of studies around the world and in North America on various different species on whether angler harvest is additive or compensatory. And it depends on the species. There's some examples where it looks like it is all additive and where it looks like it's completely compensatory. So, even in a trout population, it could be either additive or compensatory. But that's the kind of things that we as biologists with Fish and Game think about is, if you were to have 10% mortality or harvest on this population, would it even affect the total annual mortality rate at all? Would that just be 10% compensatory harvest and the total annual mortality rate doesn't change at all, because natural mortality just goes down by 10% to account for the 10% rise in harvest?
Gotcha.
And that's been shown to happen in fisheries worldwide. There's been lots and lots of examples. I mean, dozens, if not hundreds of examples where it's completely compensatory, completely additive, or somewhere in between. And it generally tends to be, when it's as low as it is in Idaho, in most situations, it's pretty much just compensatory.
Okay.
And the two groups of fish that we get pushed on the most are stream trout. And generally, when we've gone and measured, harvest rates are extremely low. And we don't see any sort of additive mortality at fishing mortality rates of 20 to even 30%. And then we also get pushed a lot on panfish.
Really?
On whether or not we're over-harvesting panfish.
Whether or not we are, even if the population can support it.
Like crappie, yellow perch.
Oh, okay.
And we've monitored those over and over again. And crappie, I think the highest exploitation rates we've seen are around 30%, which are deemed to be compensatory based on the literature and not impactful. Don't reduce the number of fish that are going to be present the next year. And so those species with those high natural mortality rates, most of the fishing mortality that we see, we still think it's in that compensatory realm where we don't have to adjust it.
Anglers just can't believe that either. They're just, how can it be 50%? How can it be 70% natural mortality? That doesn't make any sense. But it's very hard on fish to spawn. They're exposing themselves to predators because they're spawning in shallow riffles and gravel, and they're susceptible to mink, birds, kingfishers, or herons, or any osprey, any number of predators. And winter mortality can be very hard on stream fish. It's it's cold.
Yeah.
You can have frazzle ice or anchor ice, or just conditions where you have snowbanks collapsing in a pool, and it's just going to kill all the fish in that particular pool. It's really, there's an energy deficit at that time of the year. So if they don't go in with enough internal body fat into winter, it's hard for them to get through winter because it's cold. They hardly feed at all. And so, I mean, we can talk a long time about that, but it's just
disease is in there too.
Yep, disease. It's just a really high mortality rate for trout populations, and I don't think anglers understand that. They think, well, if you just stop any harvest, and we don't have a lot of heavy harvest trout fisheries anymore. But even where there's a little bit, it's like if you just make it catch and release, there's going to be that many more fish that are that much bigger. It just doesn't happen because you can't change that annual mortality rate. It's just about 40 to 50%, 60% are just going to die no matter what you do.
Right. And one kind of what you were saying at the start of this podcast was like, even if you cut off a fishery to harvest, those fish are still going to, like, the populations are going to balloon up, but the sizes are going to get smaller, right?
That can happen as well. Exactly. Yeah. Especially brook trout are vulnerable to that. It's called stunting, where you've got a really high abundance, but there's only so many groceries. So if you got double or triple the number of fish in a water body and the same amount of groceries, they all have to be smaller. You can't have your cake and eat it too.
Right.
So
seeing that in the Big Wood right now with
brook trout,
with rainbow trout.
Oh, rainbows. Okay.
In the main stem. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just something that we think about a lot, and really, one of the catch and release things is, like, we've gone so far catch and release, we really try to encourage anglers that there's a surplus out there to be harvested. Go out in a stream and kill a rainbow, kill a brook trout, throw it on the frying pan. It's fun. The kids love it.
Yeah.
You smoke trout. They're delicious. We get stuck on this. Well, kokanee, crappie, and perch. That's what I harvest, and everything else I just catch and release. And that's fine if that's your attitude, but don't do that because you think you're conserving the population, because a lot of those fish are going to die anyways. You might as well throw one or two in the frying pan and enjoy it.
Well, I got one more question for you then. The great TJ Ross, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, said this once in a podcast, because he, if you guys didn't know, or for those listening, was a former fisheries guy before he made the jump to comms, and he had gestured one time that if you go into fisheries, you end up hunting more, and if you go into wildlife, you end up fishing more. You both are fish nerds, man. Which do you guys do more, spend more time logging miles for?
Hunting.
Yeah. Okay. So it does check out.
I don't know that I love it more.
Yeah.
But I think that's totally true. And I think part of it is in the fall, we're out hunting. but a lot of the field seasons, especially when you're early in your career, a lot of the field seasons for fisheries are wrapping up, and you've got time to go fishing. And for wildlife biologists, that's when they're collecting a lot of their data. So it's maybe harder for them to get out and hunt when they're spending so much time in the field. And in the summer, they're not collecting a lot of field data, and that's when they're out angling. So maybe a little bit of it is that.
So there's a little reasoning to it. It's not just you're tired of smelling fish your whole life, so you want to go out and shoot an elk.
I can't get enough of either one. I love it all.
That's good to hear.
Kevin nailed it. When you're a field biologist and you're gone all week and you're pulling gill nets and trap nets and electrofishing, and sometimes handling maybe 10,000 fish in a week, the last thing you want to do on the weekend is go fishing, like no matter how much you love it. And then we have pretty intense field seasons, like for many, many months. You end up having some time in the fall to burn. So I'm definitely in the same boat as Kevin, where I spend a lot more days hunting than I did fishing.
Do you hunt anything with hooves, or are you all just all in on birds?
I really like to hunt whitetail and then archery elk.
Okay.
Too. Yeah.
Nice.
You got a desk job now, so you should be able to be out there in the summer as well.
This is the most I've fished in a long time. So yeah.
Oh.
Kevin and I were out kokanee fishing in separate boats on the same water this weekend.
Yeah.
Having a good old time. So yeah, we definitely get out there and experience the fishing resource.
I've always wondered about you fellas who are in fisheries that know all the places. You were talking earlier about Kevin about having a 48 fish day, which I don't think I've fished my whole life and I've never had a 48 fish day. Do you guys get like, if I asked TJ this, I was like, do you guys get jaded going out there with like electrofishing gear or fishing for the job and stuff and just like go out on your personal day and get skunked? And
Never.
That's what jades you into hunting?
No. It really doesn't. But you do, when you're out electrofishing all week and you are handling hundreds of fish.
Yeah, and big suckers too.
It does diminish your interest in, going to fish a stream where you're going to catch 8-inch fish. Although if it's cutthroat, I'm still down with that.
Have you ever done it in the opposite order where you've like fished a river and you're like, God, man, you like catch like 2 little 12-inch rainbows, but then you go and electrofish it later the next week and you catch some monsters?
Well, we see that all the time.
All the time.
Man.
The Big Wood is a good example. You can go up there and just electrofish fish left and right. The Boise River, left and right.
Yeah, I've heard that about the Boise.
Great population of fish, but they're difficult to catch. You get out there and, it's like, God, I can't catch these fish. And the anglers complaining about it. It's like, well, the population is doing outstanding.
Yeah.
So
I think we need to put some video recorders on some of our electrofishing boats because, you'll fish a place and you'll be like, "Wow, they must have died off." And then if you sample it with electricity a week later, it's mind-boggling how many game fish.
Yeah, and it's not even just jumbos. It's like the wide spectrum of what's down there too is pretty mind-boggling.
Yeah,
certainly.
And you'll run into people that when you're electrofishing that just are dying to see what's in the bucket or in the boat. Just, oh man, God, what do you got in there?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, they're just blown away at the density of populations.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, fellas, thank you so much for sitting down. I know we went over on time a little bit, so hopefully you guys were okay with that. But man, a lot of information packed into this episode.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity to kind of spill some beans and hopefully inform some anglers and see where this goes.
Me too. Yeah.
Important topic. It's on everybody's mind. So and some information out.
Definitely. And if people have questions, we have our podcast email. That's podcast@idfg.idaho.gov. If we get any questions, feel free to send them to you guys.
Absolutely.
Yep, certainly.
Cool. Well, thanks, guys. Again, Kevin Meyer, our principal fisheries research biologist, and Joe Kozfkay, our state fisheries manager. Thanks, fellas.
Thanks, Connor.
Yep.
Thanks, Connor.